All right, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to George Croft's American Music Show. Today, we are diving into the life and career of Roy Orbison, so stick around. All right, but first, I've got some dates coming up, so everybody please come out and see me. I will be this Thursday, the 14th, I'll be at Tano's in Orangevale from 6 to 10. And then after that, the August 22nd, 3rd, and 4th is the Kennedy Meadows Music Festival, which is going to be in full swing here, so get your tickets while you can. I think there's still trailer sites left and some tent sites, but the cabins are sold out. So grab your tickets while you can get them. Come on out and see us. It's going to be a great time. And then the next big chunk of news is October 16th. I'll be coming to Nashville to play the Ryman Plaza stage before the Jason Isbell show at the Ryman on the 16th. So if you're in Nashville and you're going to the Jason Isbell show, come see me beforehand. I'll be on the Plaza stage. So thank you guys so much, and we'll see you next week. We are also brought to you by Tyler & Co. Marketing, providing top-notch photography and videography services to Northern California. Tyler & Co. is your one-stop shop for social media content, product videos, commercials, promotional videos, and best of all, weddings and events. I dare you to take a quick scroll down their Instagram page at Tyler & Co. _marketing and tell me it doesn't look like a Hollywood production. If you want people to ask you who the executive producer of your wedding was, call Tyler & Co. If you want it to look like you got paid just to be in your wedding photos, call Tyler & Co. If you want the video of your first dance to look like it qualified you for the Screen Actors Guild, call Tyler & Co. And best of all, your future father-in-law is going to forgive you for everything. When he finds out how much money you're saving him on this wedding by using Tyler & Co. marketing to capture your big day. So visit tylerandcofilms.com for all your photography needs. That's tylerandcofilms.com. All right, so Roy Orbison is one of these characters that we've kind of, like if we were playing Battleship, we've landed all around Roy Orbison with our different, episodes so far. But because he's bouncing into all these other timelines that we have already covered. And his career is like this kind of, it's a relatively straight shot of like, once he gains success, he kind of has a similar deal to Jerry Lee where he kind of falls off a little bit, but then towards the end he picks it back up. But he never has like a down in the dumps moment really once he gets going. But so he's born in 1936 to his parents. His dad's name was Orby Lee Orbison, and his mom's name was Nadine, and they were born in the Texas oil fields, basically. Like his dad was an oil worker, kind of similar to Toby Keith, the way we talked about, where like dad was just like kind of hard-working oil field guy, and also was very supportive of Roy's musical ambitions. Like early on, I think, so his dad buys him a guitar when he's 6 and asks, I guess the order of operations here was like he asked his 6-year-old son what he wanted to be when he grew up, and he's expecting the usual firefighter or policeman answer. And 6-year-old Roy is like, I'm going to sing, I'm going to be a singer. And his dad's like, oh, okay. So we'll buys him a guitar and gives him all the freedom to learn how to play it. And it's, and it works out pretty good. And but when he's like throughout his childhood, Roy Orbison was never, even, through his career, he was never a crazy confident guy. Because especially in childhood, he had jaundice really bad when he was a baby. And it left, he was always really pale after that. And it kind of changed the color of his hair. So for a while there, his hair was almost blonde when he was little. And then, as he got older, it kind of browned out. But he didn't really like that. And so eventually he starts dyeing his hair jet black. And I don't know how he landed on that color, but it's the one he picked and it's the one he sticks with just to cover up this kind of jaundice hair kind of thing initially. And But anyway, so he grows up as this kind of quiet, self-conscious, artistic type, which is, pretty par for the course, I guess, especially in Texas in the 50s. And actually, there's a phase here where his family moves, I think, to Vernon, Texas, whatever town they were in. Or no, they might have moved to Wink, but then his grandparents lived, I think, in Vernon. I might be getting these towns flip-flopped. But there was a polio outbreak in the town that they were in. And so his parents sent him to live with his grandparents, who I think were in Vernon, Texas, to, avoid polio. And kind of when he's there is when he starts to really kind of, he gets a lot more time to himself, and he starts really, digging in, learning his guitar and kind of honing his craft a little bit. And so when he's 9 years old or something, he wins a talent contest on the radio. And so just his first little musical blip of, oh, maybe I can pull this off. And it's pretty early on when you're 9 or whatever. So, but anyway, so he gets through high school, and he starts a band called, I think, the Wink Westerners. Yeah, because he goes back to Wink with his parents, and he starts the Wink Westerners. And they just start playing at school dances and anywhere around the local Texas music scene that they can get, work. And it's going pretty good, and they're kind of building a regional audience. And I think he's working at a TV station briefly during this time. And he gets to meet Johnny Cash. So this is the first intersection we get of our story. This is Johnny Cash having just, he hadn't been at Sun Records that long. This is after he had gotten to Memphis, was playing his guitar in the front steps, just harassing Sam Phillips until Sam let him in. And now Johnny's on tour. Elvis had just left Sun Records. So I think this is 56. Yeah, so 1956, Elvis leaves Sun Records. Because remember, Sam Phillips had kind of run the label financially a little bit into the ground. And so when he sells Elvis's contract to, I think, RCA, that sort of gives him the money to keep Sun Records afloat, but now he's down an act. So there was an opening at Sun Records, so Johnny Cash ends up in this little town in Texas that Roy Orbison's in. And Roy just asks him, hey, how do I get on a record label? How did you do that? And Johnny Cash just tells him, oh yeah, call Sam Phillips. Here's his number. And tell him I told you to call. Because Johnny had heard him perform, I guess, at that point, and just told Roy Orbison, yeah, call Sam Phillips, here's his number. And so he does, calls Sam Phillips, and he says, hi, I'm Roy Orbison, and Johnny Cash told me to call you about getting a record deal. And Sam Phillips just says, Johnny Cash doesn't run my record label. Click, hangs up on him. So a little bit of rejection right off the bat from Sam Phillips, who, to be fair to Sam Phillips, he had a lot going on at the time. Sun Records was a happening, a chaotic place at this time. So he gets this phone call from this kid telling him that Johnny Cash told him to call. He just says, nope, click. But Roy kind of stays persistent and keeps sending him demos and stuff. And eventually, and by the way, as a band, it's not Roy Orbison calling him, it's the Wink Westerners that are calling him. Because the whole band, they send him a demo. Sam Phillips eventually listens, and he kind of changes his mind once he hears the band and they're good. He says, oh, okay, we'll give him a shot. So the whole band moves, and goes to Memphis to, sign with Sun Records. And that works briefly, but it falls apart pretty quick after they get one hit kind of done. Which I think it was Ooby Dooby is what the song was. It hit number 59 on the Billboard Hot 100. And but like I said, the band kind of falls apart because they were the Wink Westerners, but Roy's voice was such a standout, and he was obviously the front man, and he was kind of looked the part. And so tensions kind of started getting brought up about where royalty splits would go, because Roy's also writing the songs. So Roy is like the front man and the songwriter, you know, and the guy that's apparently doing all the shucking and jiving on the business front. But the rest of the band starts to, you know, feel pretty wronged here when it comes time to split up the money. And the kind of the final straw was, I think even at Sun Records, they tried to switch the name of the band to Roy Orbison and the Wink Westerners. So that was like a deal breaker. The entire band walks. Like, they all just quit and say, nope, we're not doing this. We're not just Roy's, you know, sidekicks. We thought we were a band. So they leave, but Roy does not. Roy stays behind, and he stays at Sun Records, and he intends to make it work. Problem is, on his own, he struggles to find hits soon thereafter. But I mean, Sun Records kind of keeps him around. This is where he starts touring with guys like Johnny Cash and Carl Perkins, who are the other two, Sun Records guys that are big at the time. Because you got to remember, this is the same 1956 here. And I'm not fully sure. Roy Orbison must have missed the $1 Million Quartet just by not being in the office that day, because he's right there somewhere. Like, the timelines all converge, where Roy Orbison was also at Sun Records in 1956, and he was touring with Johnny Cash and Carl Perkins, who were two of the four guys in the room when the $1 Million Quartet happened. So he was right around there somewhere. But anyway, and Elvis is within, earshot of all of this going on. Elvis actually said that, I think he basically said that Roy Orbison's voice was like what everybody wanted to be able to sing like was Roy Orbison, including Elvis Presley. So for Elvis to say that, pretty nuts. But because his voice, he almost had this like operatic, like, projection to his voice to be able to hit these high notes and stuff. That comes later. He finds that later. But initially he's singing like pretty high, like falsetto type stuff. And he draws a lot from like the style of Lefty Frizzell, who we'll probably do an episode on at some point here. Lefty Frizzell was kind of one of the pioneers of that, like, kind of rhinestoney, wearing a bandana all the time, singing high parts, kind of, that was Lefty Frizzell. And so, Roy Orbison kind of grabbed onto that. Somewhere in here, 1957. Okay. 1957. I'm not exactly sure where he meets her, but he meets Claudette Frady. And this is becoming a disturbing trend for Sun Records in the 50s. Because she is 14 when they meet, and Roy is, in his 20s. And so they get married, I think, in 1958. Like, pretty quick there. And it becomes a little bit of an issue. So he writes this song called Claudette, which was for his now wife. And but Sam Phillips doesn't want anything to do with it and won't let him cut it. Because, like, I can just imagine this, like, and by the way, so at this stage of the game, like, when he writes that song, when Roy Orbison and his now wife, who's 14 or 15 years old at the time, when they moved to Memphis, they're living in Sam Phillips's house. So he's kind of bankrolling this whole thing. And they actually moved there before they got married. And Sam had a rule that they, like, weren't allowed to stay in the same room, which is, I'm just imagining this dynamic. Here you are, you're running a record label. If you're Sam Phillips, you're running a record label. You've just had to sell Elvis Presley off just to keep the books above water. You've got all, Johnny Cash is in his full set, like, he's just pilled to the gills, running around the country, causing problems, kicking the lights out of things. You've got Jerry Lee Lewis, who has just blown his life up by getting exposed in the UK for having his 13-year-old child bride, is what they called her. And then, like, so you've got those two. Now you've got Roy Orbison, who shows up because of a recommendation from Johnny Cash. And then that guy has a girlfriend that's, like, disturbingly younger than everybody else's girlfriends. And now wives. And now they're in your house, and you've got to deal with that. And so there's a phase there where Sam Phillips has a 14-year-old girl living in his house and Roy Orbison living down the hall from her. And he's just kind of like in the middle as some last moral stand, trying to like not have the optics be too terrible. But then they get married and then they're staying together, and that's still in his house. And I can just imagine like the amount of cigarettes that Sam Phillips must have smoked through during this phase of time, because like the lobby of Sun Records, it's like, I just imagine like you've got the $1 Million Quartet happening, and then out in the lobby, like what all their wives, and Elvis's girlfriend was like 14 when he met her too. So like it's another one. So it's like what all their wives are in the lobby, like working on long division or whatever. And they're like, while he's got some of the best performers on the planet, and that contrast must have just been a nightmare for Sam Phillips to have to deal with for many, many obvious reasons. Now, that being said, the weird thing about digging into all these stories is like how not damaged some of these people are by this. Like all the you know, women that became wives when they were like 14 or whatever, they go on to have like normal lives for the most part. So it's, you know, it's not, I don't know. It's a weird phase of history to look at, and kind of a bunch of weird dynamics of what people were willing to accept at the time. And we keep running into the same issue here. But anyway, so they do get married. He writes Claudette. And then, so the reason why Sam Phillips shoots him down on this song is because, like I said, you can imagine how annoyed he must have been at this point, where it's like, you want to put this song out, draw attention to the fact that it's about your wife, at which point everybody's going to see how much younger than you she is. Like, we're going to do this again. Like, we just did this with Jerry Lee. Like, shut up, man. Like, don't draw attention to your young wife here. And definitely not while she's living in my house. No, you're not doing Claudette. Sell it to someone else, and we'll see what happens. So he does, and he sells it to the Everly Brothers. And it turns into a hit, which is ironic and funny. But, like, so it's, I don't think it hits number, let me think here. Did I write down where it landed on the charts? But anyway, it was a success, and it was kind of like, it was enough to where suddenly the royalties from that, because Roy wrote it, he's getting paid enough to kind of alleviate some of the financial strain they were under. And anyway, so that's 1958. Things don't really, his relationship with Sam Phillips never really comes back around. I think Sam had kind of had enough at that point, and Roy, they just kind of had enough of each other. And so Roy ends up moving. He leaves Sun Records and signs with Monument Records. And which was a correct career move. I mean, it did help his career quite a bit here. But, and that seems to kind of have signaled, like, Sun Records was on a bit of a downturn at the time anyway. Like I said, Johnny Cash leaves soon after, Jerry Lee Lewis leaves soon after. So there's like this wave of like, you know, Sun Records got like Elvis signed on, Elvis's career takes off. Then it's like, he had to sell Elvis, but he got Johnny Cash and Jerry Lee and all these other guys, and then it kind of just tapers back off, and Sun Records isn't around, you know, in that same way for very much longer after this phase of time. So Roy goes to Monument. And let's see here. So 1961, he releases Running Scared, which I think that was his first #1 hit in the U.S., and Crying came soon after, which peaked at #2. And that's kind of, you know, now he's a success. He's getting some national recognition and fame here, especially because his image has kind of gotten locked in. So like there's let's see here, Pretty Woman, where's my so that's 1962 is he does Dream Baby and In Dreams. So he just keeps racking up kind of pretty dang successful, you know, hits on the charts here. And in 1963, he ends up on tour in Europe with the Beatles. Right before that happened, so, you know, part of his physical ailment. Like I said, he had jaundice when he was a baby, and it kind of messed up his hair, and his skin was always really pale. He also had terrible eyesight. Like all the Orbison kids, like the Orbison family was like, dad wore thick glasses, and so did all of his kids. Like the Orbisons had bad eyesight. Like that's how they were known around town, I guess. And so he always had these big, Coke bottle glasses he had to wear. Well, he was playing a show. I think he said it was in Alabama, and he leaves his clear glasses on the bus or on an airplane, and all he had in his bag was his prescription sunglasses. But it just kind of worked. Like it kind of stuck. He wasn't trying to be cool when he did it. He just kind of, well, this is the only way I can see, so I'll just throw these on. And when you've got the stage lights in your face anyway, it's like really probably kind of helpful, honestly. So like it just kind of stuck. And anyway, so now he's got this signature look with this jet black hair that he's dyeing because of, originally his jaundice stuff, I guess. And then he's got his sunglasses on because he accidentally left his prescription glasses on a plane. But he's kind of, dressed sharp hair, got the shades going. So he's got this look now, and he just sticks with it for literally the rest of his life. Like the black hair and the sunglasses that's Roy Orbison. And anyway, so soon after that happens in Alabama, he ends up on tour with the Beatles going across Europe. And it sounds like he was wildly popular in Europe. Like and even later in his career, where his career kind of falls off in America, he's a big deal overseas. Like, so there's a time where in like he's big in like Australia and New Zealand and things like that, where it's like, even when his career in the US is not doing that great, he's still like topping charts in these other countries and other markets. But anyway, that starts to be noticed here on this tour with the Beatles, because he would go out and put on such a huge show. He's the opening act for the Beatles in 1963, which is like, they're on a run to the rise of, like they're on the path to their peak of success here in 1963. And they've got Roy Orbison out front, but the people love him. And they're calling for so many encores that it starts to chew into the Beatles' stage time, and they start to get kind of upset, to the point where at one time, Roy, so it would be like he'd go out, do an encore, and then he'd run off stage, and then the crowd would just be like, Roy, 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 until he came back out and played another song. Well, at one point, he went to do that again, and John Lennon and Paul McCartney like grabbed him by both arms and kind of just like picked him up and shuttled him to backstage, and were like, nope, you're done, we're going on. And they like sat him down, and the Beatles went on and played. And much to the chagrin of the audience. Like, they wanted Roy to come back out. I guess he was... For the Beatles to describe you as a tough act to follow is pretty nuts. Like, that tells you everything you need to know about the kind of show that Roy Orbison was putting on. Now, we start to see some of our old cliches pop up here now, like when in most of the other episodes we've done, where this guy, Roy Orbison, he's touring with the Beatles. He's doing the absolute, like, talk about the rock star lifestyle. They're kind of writing the book on how to be a rock star here. And his wife, Claudette, is at home with their one kid at the time. And tensions start to rise. That marriage starts to kind of hit the skids here, because Roy has got girls on the road, and one of them, like, I think Claudette finds a letter from one of Roy's mistresses or something, and like kind of sends her over the edge while he's on the road. And to the point where, so Roy had paid to get a house built in like a suburb of Nashville. I think it was Hendersonville or something. And anyway, so, and that's kind of being completed when he's on tour with the Beatles. Well, come to find out, Claudette had struck up a bit of a, fling with the contractor building the house. And so he finds out about that, but she's standing there holding these letters from his mistresses and stuff. So it kind of seems like the end of the road. I think they actually get divorced briefly, but then they end up kind of patching things up, and they end up kind of making it work for a while. And, but it was obviously like a very contentious, part of his marriage here because, like I said, they do briefly divorce. Now, they get back together. He ends up signing with MGM Records, and kind of still pretty high in the peak of his career here. And this is where tragedy comes and slams into old Roy Orbison, kind of really for the first time here. So him and Claudette, who was 25 years old at the time, so Roy was in his, early 30s, at least. I mean, I got to do the math. This is 1966. So, she's 25. They both loved motorcycles for whatever reason. I guess Claudette was the kind of girl that just liked to get on, like she liked riding motorcycles. She didn't just like support Roy's love of motorcycles. She liked them, and she had her own. And, which apparently somehow was connected to Elvis. Like Elvis Presley was talking to them about motorcycles and made it sound so great. And that's kind of how Roy and his wife got into them, apparently. But anyway, so, one day in 1966, Roy and his wife are just on a motorcycle ride and she gets killed in a head-on collision. Just comes around a corner, head-on with a car. She's riding a motorcycle. That's the end of Claudette. And, which, like I said, just cuts Roy, down to his core here, because despite all the, all the crazy cheating on each other and fights and divorces and get back, whatever, that she does seem to have been the love of his life up to that point. And like I said, she's the mother of his sons. They actually, so they get divorced, they get back together, have another kid right before this happens. So his second son is like really young here. And, anyway, so that was 1966. Then, so his career continues here. Now he's a widower. And, he's starting to kind of taper off a little bit. He's not like top of the leaderboards anymore. He's just kind of maintaining here. Then in 1968, that house in, I think is it Henderson or Hendersonville? Hendersonville. The house in Hendersonville burns down with both of his sons inside and they die, which is crazy. Like, I don't know how I can't find very many details about how exactly that happened, because they were two pretty little kids and, they're the only two victims of that deal. And I think Roy might have been on the road at the time. Let's see here. Yeah, he was in the UK touring when that happened. I think he had three, actually, I screwed that up. He had 3 sons at the time. 2 of them died. The youngest one lived. And Roy just doesn't have it in him to be a dad at this point. So he sends that kid to live with with Roy's parents. So that the youngest kid is being raised by Roy's mom and dad. And that's pretty tough. I'd be interested to find that guy and talk to him about like what his life was like here, because he was a baby when that happened. Roy just could not deal at the time and just kind of pulls his chute on the whole fatherhood idea for a minute and just sends his kid off to live with the grandparents. Continues to do the rock star thing. But later he goes on, he gets married again and he has 2 more sons. And he is involved with those 2 for the most part. So I wonder what that first kid's life, has been like up to now. But anyway, so, let's see here. His career starts to decline. We're getting into the 1970s here. 1969. Okay. So his house burns down in 68. Pretty soon after here, he meets a lady named, Barbara Jacobs. And again, she is 16 at the time. So, yeah, I don't know. I don't know what to do with that knowledge. It's like, man, all these guys that are the musical heroes back in the day, they're all like involved with girls that are young enough that we would send them to prison today. That happened today, you're going to jail. Like, that's no ifs, ands, or buts. We know because it's happened, you know, like there's, unacceptable behavior as of today's standards, but these guys were the kind of foundational dudes of American music at the time. But anyway, so he marries this 16-year-old girl again. And like I said, they go on to have 2 kids together. And Roy is really like, he gets through the 70s. This is kind of a flat time here. Like the 70s into the 80s he's not broke. I don't think he ever like gets back to the point where like he never runs into trouble with the IRS. He's never homeless. He's never, you know, like I heard early stories of all they could afford was like water and flour, and they would just fry dough balls and eat those. Like that was kind of how they got by initially. Once he gets financial freedom from that, I don't think he ever ends up going bust again. So even though his career is at a bit of a slump here, he's not in the poorhouse. He's doing fine. And, but this is where his medical issues start to rear their head. So he, I think he was in Hawaii the first time it happened. He was, anyway, he's on a trip to Hawaii, starts getting, chest pain, ends up in the hospital. They do an ultrasound or something and realize that he's got 3 clogged arteries. And so he needs to get open heart surgery. He doesn't get it right then. He kind of like, months later, I think he goes back to Nashville and has his open heart surgery. So he gets his bypass surgery. It goes fine. And he continues on his way. This is Roy Orbison, a guy who used to smoke 40 cigarettes a day. So, like, the fact that it's just heart trouble that's killing him here is kind of surprising to me. But, so, he's a heavy smoker, and he's a rock star guy. I mean, I don't... To be fair, in my, what I've found so far, drug use and alcohol abuse doesn't seem to be too much of a through line for this guy. Like, it doesn't seem to be enough of his story for it to really even be mentioned somewhere. Like, it doesn't say that he was some straight edge dude who stayed away from it, but it was never an issue either. So his engagement with drugs and alcohol, if at all, which I'm sure there was some, was not enough to really leave a mark on his career here, at least at this stage, I guess. So, but anyway, so now he's having heart trouble and he gets his first surgery. He's got to kind of start taking it easy. And, let's see here. 1976, he signs with Mercury Records, but it doesn't really do anything for him. 78's his open heart surgery. Let's see here. So 1980s, because we're getting into kind of his career gets like a last minute boost here in the 80s towards the end. Let's see here. So that's 88. Okay. But yeah, he starts to kind of do the same thing that Loretta Lynn did, where it's like in the tail end of their career, they're kind of partnering up with kind of younger up and coming artists and kind of, cause he can still sing, he's still one of the best singers working at the time. He's just not writing hits as much. And he's kind of become this cool dude to have come walking into your music video. It's like, cause he's so recognizable with the hair and the shades and everything else. Like it's kind of like, I kind of imagine it the way Prince used to be, where it's like all you had to do was be present in the video and you go, oh, hey, there's Prince. And it kind of gives a certain level of credibility to the younger artist here. It's kind of like that. And, but anywé, so he does that with Linda Ronstadt. He does some duets with, Linda Ronstadt covers his songs. And I think they work together a little bit. 1985, In Dreams comes out and I guess it was featured in David Lynch's Blue Velvet, which kind of got people's attention back on Roy's body of work. So that's nice. A little kind of bump in his popularity here. So 87, he's inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And he's kind of widely, at this, like I said, you're getting inducted into the Hall of Fame. You've left your mark on music. He's one of the legends. He's very recognizable. He's getting a little bit of a resurgence in, interest. Then in 1988, probably the coolest thing that ever happened to Roy Orbison happens to him in 1988. When he joins one of the craziest supergroups in history called the Traveling Wilburys. Now, the Traveling Wilburys, I kind of want to do a full episode just on the Traveling Wilburys because it's so funny and it's such a cool group of dudes. So it's George Harrison of the Beatles, who, like I said, Roy knew from touring back in the day, Bob Dylan, Tom Petty, and Jeff Lynne. Now, if you go back and look at what's cool about the Traveling Wilburys at the time is that all of those dudes were famous. Like they were all the top of their game. It was kind of like, I don't know if you could say that about Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. I guess you can. It's kind of a similar thing where like they were all already successes on their own, but this was really like there was no pressure on them to perform. They just liked writing songs and they liked each other and they liked coming up with stuff and recording and writing and stuff. And it was literally just those groups of guys. Like Tom Petty ends up there because I think it was, if I'm remembering correctly, it was Jeff Lynne that he was recording something. And then it was like he somehow got hooked up with George Harrison, who somehow called Roy Orbison, and then they had to go get his guitar, I think Jeff Lynne had to go get his guitar from Tom Petty's house, which is like, that's, you're at a certain level when, oh yeah, I got to swing by Tom's house and get my guitar, and it's Tom Petty. And so then Tom is like, oh sure, I'll go, I'm on board. And then like Bob Dylan's there, and the first recordings of it were literally just friends bouncing off each other and kind of, hey, get in the van and let's go. And they all happen to have a hole in their schedule at the same time. And really, Bob Dylan was the one who was really working the most at the time. So the Traveling Wilburys thing became a game of all of them getting together when Bob's schedule allowed it. So which was often enough, I guess. So they get together, and because they're famous already, and because everybody knows how talented they are, there is a lot of video footage of this happening. Like they're just sitting around like a bunch of buddies, writing stuff, recording things, having funny takes of stuff. They're all breaking up, laughing in the middle of a take because something, gets said wrong or whatever. Like it's just all on film. You can just see all these legendary dudes just hanging out like they're friends at school and just cranking out some of the, I don't know if I'd say some of the best music of, that decade, but maybe. And just because you had guys like Bob Dylan, Bob Dylan's not winning any awards for his voice. He's recognized as one of the best lyricists of all time. Roy Orbison can hold his own in the writing department, but really it's his voice that's paying the bills. So you've got the writing of Bob Dylan paired with the voice of Roy Orbison with, Tom Petty in there and Jeff Lynne. Like they were able to play to each other's strengths on different songs, and it just worked. And so they create an album over the course of I think 10 days or something, because the gap in Bob Dylan's schedule was enough where they kind of just like rented a house, I guess, and just I can't remember whose house they were in, but they just went there with the intention of writing a song, and they're kind of just fiddling around with guitar riffs, and kind of somebody came up with a line, and somebody looked at a box that was behind Tom Petty that was like, just, I don't know if somebody was packing up for something on it. It's like a garage with boxes, and one of the boxes has a white tape on it that just says "Handle with Care," and that was the inspiration for that song by the Traveling Wilburys. Was "Handle with Care." It was like he just read it off a box that was like behind Tom Petty in the garage. And anyway, so it was that kind of a vibe. It was just like they just got together and they were just looking for inspiration anywhere they could find it, writing guitar parts, practicing things, throwing out goofy lines, whatever. And they create an album, which is the Traveling Wilburys Volume 1. And this is like career happiness high for Roy Orbison at this point here. And let's see here. He also does a solo album called Mystery Girl during the same time, which Jeff Lynne produces for him. So this is kind of happening next to the Traveling Wilburys. So then in December of 1988, Tom Petty recalls a few days beforehand, Roy Orbison calls him and has literally just called Tom Petty to talk about how much he loved the Wilburys thing and how great this is that we can all get together. And man, what an opportunity. How cool is it that this group of guys is at this time in their careers and this kind of thing. Like, he felt grateful and stoked about it enough to just call up Tom Petty and tell him about it. And Tom's like, yeah, man, this is great. Yeah, it's, like this is thumbs up. Yep, that's what we're doing. Good talking to you, Roy. Click. Roy dies 3 days later of a heart attack, which, like I said, for the Traveling Wilburys, really just cut everybody's legs off because he was they were all, like I said, they were all friends. It was just one of the four friends. Suddenly the stools only got 3 legs. And, it just tragic and unexpected at the time, especially because he dies at his mom's house with his youngest son there. So that was the other, like I said, thinking about being that guy. So Roy goes, I think he has dinner with friends or something, and then he swings by his mom's house. And remember that his youngest son, who he effectively abandoned after the house burned down and killed the other 2 boys, his youngest son is living in that house with his mom. So I don't know how often he did that. I don't know how involved Roy was with that, with his last remaining son from his first marriage. Because remember, he has 2 other sons from his later marriage. But this is the last kid that's left from his first, from his marriage to Claudette. That kid is living in the house with Roy's mom when he goes over there, I don't know if he eats dinner with them or not, but he ends up going into the bathroom. And his mom and his son are like kind of waiting on him to come out. After him being in the bathroom for half an hour, I guess his son goes to kind of check on him, and he's dead in the bathroom. And he's had a massive heart attack, and that's the end of Roy Orbison. So pretty, like I said, a guy that bounced off of a lot of careers that we have covered and are going to cover in the future. And just kind of a cool little piece of the puzzle that kind of ties everybody together with some really cool stuff, especially at the end. And then, of course, obviously, as happens with, all these artists that we've talked about that die unexpectedly when they're working on stuff, the music that they were working on comes out after they died. And because they just died and they've been in the news, it really helps it, with the success of it all. So the Traveling Wilburys, that album gets plenty of juice. And then when they do the video, which I can't remember which song the video is for. I'm blanking on it now. But basically the music video for the Traveling Wilburys is they're going through, it's just the band members sitting in chairs in a circle sort of. And it keeps cutting to an empty chair with a picture of Roy Orbison on the wall. And that was their, paying homage to Roy, because he had just died before that, got filmed. So, and they all, everybody I haven't found any interviews of anybody complaining about Roy Orbison. He seems like he was a nice enough guy. He was a good friend and just kind of a joy to be around. He didn't have a big ego about him when it came to working with other artists like that, and he kind of, he, like I said, he seemed like a decent guy, and so, when he died relatively young, it was a bit of a tragedy, and a guy that seems to have been well regarded by all the people that he worked with, and crunk out some hits during his career, and really, you could see his influence bouncing off all these other characters we've talked about. Like I said, like Elvis drew from him, Johnny Cash drew from him, he drew from Jerry Lee, he drew from, like they were all these Sun Records artists kind of when they started, and then you could just see it ripple across everybody's, musical careers. So, yeah, Roy Orbison, another one of the greats. So, that's it for this week. Thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.